Hello again people, today we have another Deltarune theory. In this video we will talk about everyone's rambunctious reptilian adolescent, Susie. Before and during the initial stages of Deltarune, it was beyond confirmed that Susie treated Kris very poorly. Assault, name-calling, threats, all fall under the transgressions that Susie has committed to Kris. Why was Susie so angry with Kris? Does she have a personal vendetta? Can it all be chalked up to a one-dimensional bully archetype? To understand the fuel behind the rage of this young monster, we are going to have to dive into the realm of child psychology. But first, a big disclaimer. I am not a child psychologist. I do not have a degree in child psychology, nor do I claim to be an expert in the field. I have done a considerable amount of research about the causes of bullying between adolescents in preparation for this video. Psychology is a scientific discipline that studies mental states and processes and behavior in humans and non-humans. To properly understand Susie's anger, we will first establish her behavioral habits. Only then can we find her emotional triggers. Number 1. Susie is impulsive. Number 2. Susie has self-esteem issues. Number 3. Susie has been known to project onto others. Number 4. Susie has violent tendencies. Okay, so what drives Susie to act impulsive? Impulsiveness can be attributed to many things, such as mental illness, lack of structure or discipline, but impulsiveness can also be a learned trait. When looking into the causes of bully behavior in young children, one of the reasons that struck me were that it also can be a learned trait from family. It has been heavily theorized ever since the release of Chapter 1 that Susie suffers from a broken home life. We don't see her home and hometown, and we don't even know if she really has one. Children pick up all kinds of things from their parents or guardians, including behavioral habits. If she is so quick to turn to violence towards people who are against her in the dark world and willing to assault Kris when no one's around, then we could assume that someone else threatens or assaults her in private as well. I told you this was going to be a serious video topic. We're only getting started, so settle in. Now let's talk about Susie's proposed self-esteem issues. At the beginning of Chapter 2, Noelle asks Susie to come study with her. Susie is completely shocked by this and openly states that if they did study together, Noelle will likely fail. Also, we can pair that with Susie being absolutely oblivious to the fact that Noelle has a crush on her. Low self-esteem is also a developmental flaw, or it's something that is reinforced by people around you. At some point in Susie's life, or even constantly, she didn't get the emotional support that she needed, so in her mind, she doesn't feel like she is worth the support. Susie is known to project onto others. This idea is supported in one piece of dialogue in the beginning of Chapter 2, a very well hidden dialogue that you only see if you look at Kris's room and then try to leave before looking at Susie's. Susie accuses Kris of stealing cake, when we all know that if Ralsei summons a magical cake through his cauldron, Susie slurps it up all for herself. Ralsei identifies the fact that Susie is projecting onto Kris. Another piece of evidence that supports this comes from the charity goal from the Spamton sweepstakes. Do you remember that? Good times, good times. In the most interesting of rewards, also one that spawned my first ever theory about Deltarune, Susie becomes angry with Kris, which prompts her to say, "One day your mom is gonna get sick of you, you little freak." Everyone, myself included, deduced that she was projecting onto Kris in this instance. If you by chance want to see my two theories about what Kris said to Susie that made her leave, links are in the description. More importantly, in the description is someone by the name of JQR, who has made actual pixel art animations based on all of the pieces of text that were released during the Spamton sweepstakes. Do consider checking out their channel, link in the description. And finally, we have the symptom of Susie having violent tendencies. This doesn't even really need an example. We see Susie from the very beginning easily becoming angry and choosing to violently attack people who get in her way. Luckily, she doesn't cause any permanent damage, and after being met with someone who genuinely seeks to support her and be her friend, Lancer, she stops. She chooses mercy. She can't bring herself to hurt Lancer when before she wouldn't hesitate to abuse Lancer or Kris. Let's take a quick second to talk about Kris. In Noelle's words, she really hates Kris. This is most likely to imply that Susie routinely chooses Kris as her main target. It is actually quite common for bullies to choose a favorite victim, so to speak, for lack of a better phrase. This typically turns out to be the weaker one, the more quiet one, the one who is least likely to protest their treatment. So is it just circumstance as to why Susie has chosen Kris as her main target? Could it be because Susie just hates humans? Well, after analyzing the two specific moments that we know of where Kris was bullied by Susie, I have noticed some recurring themes. For one, she is threatening to bite Kris with her teeth. Interestingly enough, biting is actually something that children are known to do at times. Lack of impulse control, frustration stemming from inability to process strong emotions, might cause a child to bite out of anger. However, I would mention that Susie never actually bites anyone, she just threatens to do so. Another recurring theme is the mentioning of Kris's mother, Toriel. In Chapter 2, we see that Susie actually knows a good bit about Toriel, and on top of that, she seems to be very respectful, calling her ma'am and such. Typically when boys mention someone else's mother, it's in a negative connotation, but here, Susie speaks very highly of Toriel. The projecting statement seems to imply a hint of jealousy from Susie, which leads me to question, what is Susie's relationship with her mother? Obviously something like this we can only assume, but if we pay close attention to all of Susie's actions, I believe using psychology, we can make a pretty good assumption. One would hope that Susie and her mother are very close. After all, reptiles are some of the best mothers in the entire animal kingdom. Speaking of reptile mothers, usually when reptiles have babies, well, there's a lot of them. For example, reptiles can have anywhere from 7 to 60 eggs, depending on the species, and yet, Susie doesn't have a single sibling to speak of, that we know of. What if Susie in fact does have siblings? What if Susie has several siblings? This whole time, people were assuming that Susie was an only child with abusive parents. But what if Susie has perfectly fine parents, she just has a lot of older and younger siblings that we just haven't seen yet? Some of you may be asking yourself why this even matters. You see, if this theory is true, then it would explain everything. In 2016, the University of Houston conducted research surrounding the negative effects of having larger families. They concluded that as the number of children went up, the investment of the parents decreased. This would include cognitive development, overall time spent with children, affection, and just overall resources to name a few. This would mean that Susie doesn't get the support she needs to properly grow. Her more violent siblings end up getting more attention, so she learns to act more aggressively. She never learned how to properly process her emotions because there's just too many voices around her. She can't get a word in. We know that Susie, while being a monster, is of reptilian type. If we were to assume that the biology would even be remotely similar, Susie would have a large amount of siblings. Imagine yourself for a second. Put yourself into Susie's shoes. You're a monster. You come from a massive monster family. Your parents do everything they can to provide for you. But with so many kids to feed, you barely get any, so you have to resort to sneaking chalk at school because you're constantly hungry. Your parents are more than happy to give you love and attention, but because there's so many other siblings around you also gunning for attention, you can't even get a word in. Your parents barely talk to you, so when you see someone else who refuses to speak, it makes you upset because it only reminds you of the love your parents never had the ability to give you. Not only that, there's this human who goes to the same school as you. They sleep through almost every single class, but still manage to maintain number 3 spot in the class grades, while you are stuck at the bottom. Every day, this human gets to be driven to school by their mother when you have to walk, and their mother cares about them so much that they hold their hand when bringing them inside. It's not fair. It's not fair. Why can't I have a good mom like Kris? Why does nobody care about me? This has got to be one of my favorite cutscenes in the entire game so far. This is also one of the main reasons I will never believe the Kris is evil theory. This isn't the player's influence. If we are to take all of Toby Fox's world-building decisions seriously, then we have to make the assumption that this is Kris themselves saving Susie. Even with the soul still within them, they fight through its influence and move to protect Susie. Why did Kris do this? Because whether Susie knows it or not, Kris understands her perfectly. Look at Kris's room. It's a shared room with their brother Asriel. Asriel is the talk of the town. He has so many awards, everyone loves him. Toriel and Asgore absolutely loved Kris, but how could they ever give their adopted human child the same amount of attention they gave their actual monster son, Asriel? Toriel didn't even know anything about raising a human. She had to read and study how to take care of one, and even still, she probably doesn't understand. Kris has been known to disappear for long periods of time on end, and Toriel just thinks it's something normal that Kris does from time to time. Kris, throughout their entire life, has lived inside the loving shadow of Asriel. Wonder why Kris was so quiet before we showed up? Probably because Asriel was so outgoing and talkative, so warm and caring. Kris never got a word in. Kris never received the attention they needed from their parents. That's why they understand Susie. That's why they don't mind if Susie picks on them from time to time. That's why Kris is never afraid of Susie, because deep down, Kris understands that they are birds of a feather. This moment in particular is actually very important for Susie and her growth. It's at this very cutscene where after Kris saves her, she stops hiding her eyes and her hair. From here on out, we see Susie continue to change. She solves the puzzle faster than Birdly, showing she's getting more confident. She asks Ralsei to teach her how to heal people, showing that she is more willing to ask for help, because now she can get that help. She springs into action when Noelle is captured. She supports Kris because she knows they will support her. She finally understands what it means to be a friend. Susie is a very complex character. It's one of the reasons she's one of my favorites. I can't wait to see how she continues to learn. Maybe in the future she'll use what she has learned to help others. We'll just have to wait and find out. But until then, thank you all so much for watching. Goodbye.